Good evening, everyone. It's a full house. We love to see it. My name is Melissa Gonville. I'm CEO of YWCA Delaware, who's hosting this event, and I'm very honored to serve as the moderator for this evening's 2024 Gubernatorial Forum. So thank you to all of you who are joining both in person and online. We actually have quite a few people online today. First, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to First Unitarian for graciously hosting us tonight. I also want to acknowledge and thank our event partners, the ACLU, DCADV, Housing Alliance Delaware, Sierra Club of Delaware, Dana, Votamos, Gen Vote, Delaware Center for Justice, and Black Mothers in Power. Together, our organizations have carefully crafted the questions that you're going to hear tonight, focusing on the issues that we all personally advocate for. Most importantly, we want to thank the candidates who have taken the time out of their busy campaigns to join us. Colin O'Mara, County Executive Matt Meyer, State Rep Mike Ramone, and Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long. Your presence here tonight is greatly appreciated. The additional Republican candidates, Jerry Price and Bobby Williamson, were unable to join us this evening. While we won't have time for audience questions this evening, we've invited all the candidates to stay for light snacks and beverages until 9 p.m. in the back. So this will allow you to speak personally with the people who are here tonight. So the program will go till 8:30, and then we'll be here till 9 to have conversations. So tonight's format is as follows. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening and closing remarks and 90 seconds to answer each of the 10 questions that we have, which will also be displayed on the screen in front of you. Please focus on helping the audience understand your candidacy, priorities, and vision for Delaware as governor. Please refrain from using mobile devices as it may distract the audience. We aim to cover as many questions as possible, including a few kind of quick round, 30-second questions at the end if time permits. We're going to start from the audience's left to right, and then go right to left. So we're just going to keep going that way throughout the questions. You have note paper and pens there for your convenience. And we do ask that the audience please hold any applause so that we can move through the questions promptly and hear from each candidate on each question. Our timekeeper in the front will signal when you have 30 seconds remaining with a yellow card and when your time is up with a red card. So we're going to kindly ask that you respect each other's time and stay within the allotted time for your responses. Please also really try to distinguish your answers from those who have spoken before you, especially since some of you may share similar ideas and platforms. Any questions before we begin? Nope. Okay, I figured you've done this a few times. All right, well, I'm gonna go sit down there, but I'm gonna start with Mr. O'Mara. If you can start with your 2-minute opening, and then we'll pass it down the line.
No, thank you so much. It is wonderful to be with all of you. We were kind of tallying it up earlier today. We've done more than 50 of these across the state. So we could actually do each other's parts at this point for all of you. But when Becca reached out about this event, I was actually pretty excited because seeing the diversity of social justice groups and environmental groups and folks who are just doing amazing work coming together to actually talk about these important issues right before the election couldn't be more important. And so I just want to introduce myself in my 2 minutes. My name is Colin O'Mara. I became Secretary of DNREC, the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control, under Governor Markell in 2009. I had a chance to lead that incredible agency, which is responsible for our state parks, all the wildlife areas, responsible for everything from cleaning up our air and our water and cleaning up brownfields, all the work on energy and climate. It was able to make some progress on a lot of different fronts, and obviously still a lot of work has to be done. After that, I actually became the CEO of the National Wildlife Federation. Any Ranger Rick subscribers in the audience here? Anybody? Okay. Woohoo! It was kind of one of my favorite organizations as a kid. I kind of grew up as a Ranger Rick kid, and I've been doing that work for 10 years now, and able to work on things all across the country, trying to elevate the work of climate change, habitat restoration, the work of environmental justice all across the country, and here in Delaware. In Delaware, our state affiliate is the Delaware Nature Society, which obviously does some of the best work in the entire country. One of the things that I was able to work on in that role, though, was I was able to work on federal legislation with President Biden and Vice President Harris around the Inflation Reduction Act, kind of the biggest climate piece of legislation in U.S. history, as well as amazing work around infrastructure. The reason I got into this race was very specific. It was about kids. I'm a girl dad, I'm a public school parent, I'm a youth basketball coach and soccer coach, And we're not doing right by our kids right now. You know, when more than 60% of kids can't read at grade level, when we have the 4th worst performing schools in the country, we have some of the highest rates of childhood poverty in the region, we have some of the worst rates of infant mortality, we could be doing so much more. And when I look at democratic states across the country, they are doing more with the majorities. We can have a progressive leadership that makes Delaware the first state of the 21st century, not just the 18th century. Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight. Every few months I find myself in this church for an event, usually where I'm sitting where you're sitting, and learn something new that I take to go and govern our county a little bit better. It's an honor to be here. Tonight when I was walking in, the pastor said to me, you know, we had a Matt Meyer here performing a few months ago. He came to sing, and people were expecting me to show up and sing, so I will spare you that this evening. But it's an honor to be here. I literally grew up down the street from here on Shipley Road. Grew up with all the opportunities in the world, going to Brandywine School District schools, eventually graduating from Friends, going off to college, and having opportunities to work all over the world. In Kenya, where I learned Swahili, eventually as a diplomat in Iraq, embedded with the U.S. Army for 12 months. I came home and ultimately found my passion. Not in travel, not in politics, but really in teaching. I taught 6th and 7th grade math in a public school on the east side of Wilmington. And I enjoyed it. It was incredible. My teachers, my fellow teachers, the paraprofessionals, incredibly passionate about educating. But the more we taught, the more I found myself getting angry. Angry because my students were not getting the resources that they deserve. Too many families were struggling with unstable housing. An incredible number of students in my class suffering in communities with gun violence. So I stood up to do something. I ran for office, ran based on public service, not self-service. We got in an upset victory in 2016, rolled up our sleeves and got to work, protecting the most vulnerable. During COVID, doing extraordinary things, buying the largest hotel, one of the largest hotels in our state, and turning it into the largest emergency shelter our region has ever seen, the Hope Center. Continuing to partner with you to protect the most vulnerable. There's a lot more that can be done in this state. Our education system is struggling. Housing is not affordable, and healthcare is too inaccessible to too many. I look forward to discussing those issues with you tonight.
Hello, it's nice to be here today on this beautiful day. My name is Michael Ramone, and many of you may know me. I used to own the Ramone's Flower Shops, many of them up north. I also had the Florist Exchange, Wilmington Florist Exchange. Trickled into the fitness industry and have probably best been known in this area for coaching a lot of young children in swimming. We own the Delaware swim team. But more importantly, why am I here and who am I? I'm a guy that grew up in Limestone Acres. I've lived in Delaware my entire life, as my family have. Never was even on an airplane till after I was married. We didn't travel a lot. We didn't have a lot of money, but we worked hard. And my dad worked several jobs, as did my mother. Around my junior year in college, I found the woman I wanted to marry. I asked her father, Ross. I said, Ross, I'd love to marry your daughter. That's what little Italian boys do, whatever. And he says, that's fine, Michael. Just make sure you have a job first. And that was Ross, senior executive at the DuPont DuPont company's way of saying, finish your college career and get a real job. He was a doctor and a PhD and so forth. Long story short, I opened a flower shop 2 months later. Bought one right there in Lancaster Pike in the city, sold my car, took my $8,000 and started a flower shop. Got shocked a bit when only one person bought $1 bunch. I thought like, hey, I did everything I'm supposed to do. This should be awesome, but it wasn't. And that's where I learned the value of relationships. Building relationships, I think, is more important than anything else in the world, and I'm so sorry to watch the polarized political world we're in with the far, far right and the far, far left, and they're all yelling so loudly they're not listening. In relationships, You don't build relationships with everybody that you agree 100% on. I don't know how many married couples there are, but I could see a few. You don't agree with your husband at 95, well, probably not even 50% of the time, but let's say more than that. My point is, we need to bring our world to a point where we can build relationships, we can be kind, and we can listen. And hopefully tonight you'll be able to hear me as I try to go through some of the topics that are important to our community. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I am Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long, and many of you in here I've had the privilege of serving over 2 decades in the legislature, doing lots of incredible policy work together. But I am so thrilled to be second in command, ready on day one as the next governor of the state with a really bold and innovative plan. And for those who know me, know it's around 4 areas: education, economics, healthcare, and quality of life. Those are the 4 things in 4 years. And it really starts with education. I know we've heard others talk about that. I've been fortunate to go through all public school here in the state, born and raised, but the first in my family to get to go to college. So it's really important that all of our children have that opportunity. You know, my grandma, the smartest woman I knew, raised on a farm, 8th grade education, said nothing more important. So for me, I hope tonight we have a little conversation around education, because that's what the YWCA and many of you are about. Also leaning into the economy and the economics, making sure women and minorities and others have opportunity for small and big business. Really bold plan. And in turn, healthcare. As a career educator, as a nurse, many of you in this room with whom I vaccinated, as the undercover lieutenant governor leading Delaware's pandemic resurgence, had the opportunity to vaccinate over 4,000 Delawareans in 5 months. But some of the legislation that we champion, telehealth, I was told as a senator, couldn't happen. Those kind of innovations and fighting and standing for Delaware is important. Can you imagine if we hadn't had that? And in turn, quality of life, housing, making sure we have homes that we can afford. And, you know, with Bethany, you get an individual who's led national entities and organizations, and I'm competitive. I'm going to make sure that our state remains fiscally strong and that has that future. And so for me, being the second woman, hopefully to be the next governor, the first nurse governor in America, and humbly endorsed by our Delaware Democrat Party, our Emily's List, our incredible AFL-CIO, and our teachers union, and also Delaware Stonewalls. I just am so excited to have a conversation tonight and hopefully walk out with a few new ideas with you. Thank you.
Thank you all for those introductions. So we're going to start the questions now, and just a reminder, 90 seconds. We're going to start on the left, the audience left for the first one, and then we'll come down and we'll go back the other way. So the first question is related to the affordable housing crisis. It's widely recognized that there's a severe shortage of affordable housing in Delaware. What immediate and long-term strategies do you propose to address Delaware's housing crisis? What stakeholders would you involve in these efforts? So we're going to start with you, Mr. O'Mara.
Right now, 109,000 families across the state are either struggling with their rent or their mortgage. The number is going up by the month. And the Department of Housing, the Housing Authority, has identified that we're going to need 20 to 30,000 additional units just by the end of the decade, and that number is probably low. There's a lot of drivers of this crisis right now. One has been that we're seeing more and more investors buy up more and more properties. So like if you go down to like the coastal communities right now, 20 years ago, 10% of the beach properties would have been owned by investors. Now you're like 25, 30, even 35% in some communities. That's forcing year-round owners out. It's forcing prices up as folks are trying to make money off short-term rentals. In different places here in Newark and kind of parts of the Brandywine 100, you're seeing similar things. But all of a sudden, folks coming in and buying properties, not because they want to, provide like a good service, but because they view them as cash cows. And so we do have to look at the ownership patterns, and there's things we can do to make sure we're holding owners accountable. There's some very serious conversations right now in the General Assembly looking at rent stabilization, because we saw rents go up 20% in some cases for some folks during the COVID crisis. But we also have a supply problem. We have a massive shortage of housing. And there are 2 main reasons for this. One is a lack of predictable funding. We're one of the only states that's kind of a Democratic state that doesn't have predictable funding for like a housing production fund. We could dedicate some revenues towards that, $20 to $30 million a year. So nonprofits in particular that are building affordable housing can predict that funding to be able to build affordable housing. And the second is that it's really hard to build dense, affordable housing, infill development, near existing infrastructure that's smarter for the climate in a lot of places than it is compared to greenfield development. So we did those three things, it would transform the landscape for affordable housing.
Yes, I should mention, I found out in these debates it's hard to solve comprehensive problems in 90 seconds. We wrote a book that I encourage you to go on our website and see an extensive policy on education, housing, healthcare, climate, and other things. Listen, in terms of housing, according to the Housing Alliance of Delaware, the leadership of which I think is somewhere in the room, today we're short over 20,000 affordable units. For a family of four to afford a rental property today, they need to be making 70% more than the minimum wage. There's a serious structural problem. There are three things we're going to do immediately to work to address it. First is funding. I, for the past 8 years, have been running the largest local affordable housing program in the state of Delaware. I see the need to supplement the federal sources of funding to make sure those in desperate need of basic shelter have access to funds. Second is we need to look at our regulatory structure. Make sure that those wanting to build dense housing through smart growth policies can build housing. By the way, smart growth policies enable us to build in dense areas that enable us to preserve open space in other areas. The third is to make sure we are taking steps to protect our most vulnerable, expanding on models like the Hope Center across our state. So there's a logical, sensible continuum of care for our most vulnerable individuals and families.
So housing isn't like something that's a crisis now. It's been a crisis. It's just worse now. Everybody deserves the right to see a path to be able to enjoy the American dream, and that's home ownership. Our community has an obligation to help people up, to put them on a trajectory where they can be successful, be productive to society, and be supported. No one's perfect. None of us. Believe me, been watching that for a while. But what we are is we're caring. We're compassionate. Housing is about starting from the bottom up of society, working with nonprofits. If we're going to invest your tax money, when I was on bond for years and when I was on JFC for years, I need to make sure that I'm using your tax money for something that's purposeful, something that's measurable, and something that develops results. We've had some great relationships. Lieutenant Governor and I, sitting on this, presiding over the Senate as I'm in the House, with many nonprofits in Delaware, North Wilmington, Dover, all the way down in Sussex, because there's areas of dense need. But when we have county councils and counties who control the zoning and the ability to have density, you need to all be able to work together and not argue with each other. I look forward to being able to talk more about that as we go. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, housing, is a right. It's really what got me involved in politics, working with mentally ill homeless veterans. And we have to have a line item of stabilization. Absolutely, as your next governor, we'll have that line item. 2, we're going to lead in. I've led the housing initiative, chairing the Senate Community Affairs Committee. I had to memorize all 57 charters. I can tell you a lot of the logjam is at our county level with housing permits being delayed. And then also, the state has to have a culture of excellence. As your next governor, just like we repaired some of the delays and lags in our health system, we're going to address some of those same things with our DNREC and our DELDOT and permitting. So you've got permitting and things that government can regulate and oversee. You've got funding that has to absolutely happen. You have to have all the stakeholders at the table. That's what we're going to do. We have to have home builders. I have led nationally. I am embarrassed that Montana and other states have taken over their plus land use processes, and we have not done the same here in this state. We need to be able to renovate houses into bigger apartment complexes in 5 months, not 5 years. We have to lean in and make sure that we continue the landlord rent tenant agreements that allow people to afford rent, and we have to have rental assistance. Tax credits have to continue. Our investments in the bond have to continue to allow those houses that all people can afford, persons with disability, our veterans, and all. Finally, I'm a big advocate of birth to 5. Not only is that early education, but childcare. 80%, up to 80% of young adults cannot afford a house or get a job because they haven't been able to afford the childcare. They have the childcare, universal childcare, which we'll bring. That will be another cog in the wheel, another tool in the toolkit. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the second question is related to supporting community health workers. Community health workers, or CHWs, play a crucial role in Delaware's Health Equity Plan, bridging the gap between underserved communities and healthcare services. How would your administration continue to support and expand the role of the community health workers in Delaware? And we're going to start with you, Dr. Hall-Long, on that one.
Wow, love the question, because in the Senate I sponsored the first bill that worked through with the Division of Public Health around community health workers. Funding that began, and many of you here in the Y who had the domestic violence partnership with community health workers, peer specialists. The funding started through my office, the Lieutenant Governor. We work collaboratively, and it's important. We have a community health worker association in Delaware. It is something I work with almost monthly or weekly. It is important. I will invest permanent long-term funding. Every dollar we invest in a community health worker returns $7 to $12, depending on the data and the studies. As a data analyst, as a professor, a scientist, a nurse, I tell you, when I visit on the streets of Delaware, as the undercover lieutenant governor working in hotels and communities, that's the game changer. That is the glue. When we go to do universal educational reform and changes, community health workers are critical for our seniors. They're critical for domestic violence prevention. And as your next governor, we're going to have the funding. We're going to leverage third party. Oh, I thought my time was up. I have 30 more seconds. That's why the glasses on so I can see. We want to leverage third party reimbursement. We've not done that. That's really important. Those of you who work in community health worker lanes understand that. English is second language, higher risk needs in the community. We have to invest. Other states that I've led through the National Lieutenant Governors Association is doing this. I will help bring that to this state further, deeper. It is a game changer. And for those of you who work with community health workers, raise your right arm, pat yourselves on the back. Thank you for what you do every single day. You're really the glue to Delaware's care. Thank you.
Thank you. The Lieutenant Governor went through much of the detail of how the function of it is, and the reality is simple. These nonprofit entities that come in front of the House of Representatives and have to go through JFC, now we actually have some also going through bond if they're doing infrastructure, are very interesting how we address each through grant and aid. We have some very valuable participants in the nonprofit world with our General Assembly. And the issue is simple. Everybody's treated the same. Now, in most times, that's what you should do, right? But when I watched year after year of some of the nonprofits that do so much, and without them, the state of Delaware would have such an enormous expense and so many positions that they could not even do the job 1/10 as well as the nonprofit sector. When our current governor got elected, we had a $300 million deficit. What did we do? We cut everybody equally. There were some wonderful nonprofits that almost got knocked out of existence. We need to make sure that we understand the value of every nonprofit to the state. And the more they enhance that value, the more funding we should be providing, because every time we give them $1, as our Lieutenant Governor said, we save probably 2 or more. It takes a business person, it takes somebody who's been an entrepreneur for 42 years, and it takes someone who's been in Dover for 16 to understand how this math works, and I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
So 8 years ago, I'm elected to run our state's largest local government. And one of the things I did is I went and met with county employees in different offices. We oversee the largest 911 center, emergency communication center in the state of Delaware. Sat down with 911 operators, talked to them about things they loved about their job and struggles. And when I talked to them, one thing consistently came up, and that is there were certain people who were frequently calling 911 several times a day, several times a week. You knew that they were going to call. It's almost like they call and you say, "Hi, John." One of them joked with me. Our paramedics said a similar thing. They were going to similar residences. So what we did is we took that information and we called Christiana Care and we put together a community health worker program called Community SOS. It's now, I think, in its 6th year. And what it does is we send community health workers proactively to these homes so that we don't wait for them to call 911. My wife is an emergency room doctor. Last week, there were 80 people in the waiting room at Christiana Care. With smart deployment of community health workers, we can help provide primary care to those people that need it. When we had COVID money, when COVID-19 happened and we had federal resources come, one of the first things we did is started an AmeriCorps program called the National Health Corps. Community health workers, training people from the community to provide basic health. Several of them have now gone on to other health careers. We're going to continue to build on and expand those programs to find strategic advantages to build our workforce and make a healthier community.
I had the privilege of spending a bunch of time with a community mobilization group a few months ago, and it was interesting listening to Dr. Henry Smith and folks, because I kind of had this realization that there's an ideological shift that has to occur in terms of the way we engage community health workers, and it really starts with treating them as first partners. I mean, Mike's exactly right. I mean, like, the amount of money the state saves by having these partnerships is absolutely huge. I mean, the services that could never be provided by DHSS or by the kids department. Yet we don't treat them like partners, right? We treat them like nonprofits. We also expect them to do the work for a fraction of the cost of actually doing the work. Like, I think the entire kind of DHSS has to be rethought. You know, when you look, if you start with the social determinants of health, and you start with the outcomes that we have, you know, the incredibly high rates of everything from hypertension and heart disease to obesity to respiratory illnesses and asthma, going through cancer rates. The solution to a lot of these challenges we face are going to be authentic work in communities that's culturally informed, that's making sure that it's authentic, that it's delivered well. That's going to be through community health, it's going to be through community workers in this space. It's not going to be through kind of government actors. And so I'd like to see us kind of have a new mindset. We're basically starting making sure that everyone is kind of fully compensated for the work that they're doing. We're not leaving money on the table. As the Lieutenant Governor said, there's a lot of federal money that's available for a lot of this work that we're not currently seizing right now, getting the reimbursement rates right. But really have it be a partnership. I mean, we are so unhealthy on so many fronts right now. It's going to require an entirely new way of thinking. It can't be the kind of the great society approach to kind of delivering healthcare. It's got to be a 21st century approach, and that starts with having workers in the communities that are actually providing these services in a culturally competent way.
Okay, thank you all. The third question is prevention of domestic and sexual violence related. Our organizations believe that preventing domestic and sexual violence is preventable and achievable. CDC studies emphasize that a public health approach focused on primary prevention can effectively address the root causes of such violence. If elected governor, how would you support and invest in the prevention of intimate partner violence?
I appreciate the question, because these are some questions that we didn't get at some other debates, and I think they're so important, right? Because this is one of those hidden kind of parts of violence that are so prevalent, you know, across the state and across every state, and I don't think we've done nearly enough. You know, I mean, I think making sure that there are places that the nonprofits that are supporting this work have the resources that they need is obviously a top priority. Making sure that there are places to be able to go for help, the shelters, the, you know, kind of the underground ability to move people around and protect people. Like, we have a culture of secrecy in the state, and we see it in the corporate levels, we see it in government. You know, we're only 18 states, we're not one of the 18 states in the country right now that actually prohibited things like non-disclosure agreements. So if there's some kind of a sexual assault in a workplace or sexual harassment, you know, those are banned in most states, many municipalities across the state. We haven't done that here in Delaware yet. We don't have a lot of the support services that people need. And so, I mean, this is everything from folks in kind of marital rape and kind of in kind of incommitted relationships to kind of all kinds of other kind of all kinds of different kinds of arrangements. I think this has to become a much bigger priority. And it's hard to talk about this stuff, it's uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, the victims that are being silenced because of the way that we have not allowed survivors to actually kind of get the services that they need to allow them to speak publicly is an absolute disgrace. And it's something we could absolutely fix with legislative leadership, especially given our Democratic majorities in Dover.
Thank you. We need to make sure we prioritize safety and we put our money where our mouth is. Following COVID, we got federal funding. The first question I asked when we got CARES Act funding, which was distributed to every single local and state government in the country, is who have we missed? Who have we not gotten resources to that need to be protected? And as we talked to people in the community, including some in this room, we found that survivors of domestic violence and domestic violence rates spiked during COVID. We're not being protected. So the very first grants we gave out were to organizations, some of whom sponsored this debate tonight, in a competitive grant process to get resources to protect our most vulnerable. One thing I know, because I've spent most of my adult life outside of government, is often government is not providing critical services to people in need. We have a duty, leading your state government, to make sure we're funding those organizations appropriately, to making sure anyone who's a survivor of domestic violence has a safe place to go. A safe place like the Hope Center, a safe place like a YWCA shelter, or a safe place that others may create and provide. It's our job to take your tax money and make sure we're putting it to use to protect people and give them a brighter tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great topic I enjoy because I feel there's so much we can do much differently than what we've done in the past. I've been a very big supporter of SOAR. I've been very supportive with other organizations that help and protect people from abuse, both sexual abuse, child abuse, and many other categories which are mental abuse. However, I would like to just say there needs to be a three-way approach. Number one, for those who are being abused, we need to have an environment available to them, like the YWCAs in other areas, where they can get out of the environment of abuse and feel safe and protected. Often people are afraid to call the police because they think their abuser, will be put in the system and let back out, and then they're going to be retaliated against. Certain organizations understand that very well, and that's very much a concern. So what do we need to do? We need to have a quick path so that if someone is in a crisis, they have a path forward that they feel safe. We need to have a path where we are giving the resources to those who need to have them protected and be safe, as in our police and healthcare reactive agencies and nonprofits. And third, we need to reconfigure the way we do rehabilitation. Locking people away because they're not safe to society, so they serve their time, is not very well thought out. When I went to university, I'm out of time, but when I went to Delaware, I was in criminal justice. I learned a lot about this. I look forward to being able to put a place together where we can actually rehabilitate the offenders. Thank you.
Thank you. What an important topic. You know, for almost 4 decades, as an educator, I've taught about domestic violence and exit plans and the importance, and I want to compliment the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council and the others who are here tonight. Nothing more important than safety. As the next governor, yes, I will invest, to answer your direct question, in public health primary prevention, which is education, trauma prevention. I chair the Board of Pardons. I see the trauma effects early on that could be prevented. So teen dating violence initiatives, working with you with the community health workers, ensuring that those resources are there, whether it's intimate partner and violence, elder abuse, child abuse, all of this can be prevented, and it's part of trauma and other life wraparound services that are often important in substance use disorder, education, outreach. So as the next governor, we'll absolutely address that. And folks, it also is important, as I know Colin Mero had indicated, we have to do preventative measures in our workplace where sexual harassment occurs. We have to make sure that we eliminate non-disclosure agreements. We have to make sure that we protect and we stand up for our members in our community so that everyone feels protected. But predominantly, in me as an ex-governor, you will have someone who has been in the community. I have walked women through the court system, through the justice system, understanding what a ex parte PFA is. I've lived it with a best friend who was threatened by her husband, who we thought were going to be murdered, and they broke in my home. I understand, I bring that passion, I bring that commitment, and in me, we'll make those reforms together. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is related to education funding gaps. A recent independent report commissioned by the state of Delaware found that public schools are underfunded by $600 million and recommended increased per pupil funding, transparency, and resource allocation flexibility. What specific steps would you take to close this funding gap and ensure that all districts provide a constitutionally adequate education?
Well, very important, because I saw ACLU here. I know they've been involved in lawsuits this past year, a couple of years, with the counties and the state and others. And I have to say to you, as the career educator endorsed by the Delaware State Teachers Education, you have my full commitment that you have someone who's been at the table, who understands how to get to W. It's going to be difficult. We're going to change the equalization formula so that we are going to make sure that we address funding in the state. We're going to look at creative funding sources, and we're going to have to really make sure that those dollars end up in the classroom. We have to make sure that not only our teachers are paid, but we recruit and continue to get the best teachers in the community, and we put the teachers in the schools with the greatest need. Just like as a nurse, I have an ICU patient, I put my most highly qualified nurse at the bedside. We need to be doing that in our classrooms. So funding formula flexibility, equalization modification, you need somebody who's been there. I've sponsored over 1,000 bills. How did I get that done? Understanding how to get to the W. Folks, districts are going to fight over that equalization unless you have a leader who can help them understand how we're going to get to W. And with that, we're going to do early education, has to occur, and that can be done. 1,825 days, 90% of a child's brain is developed. We have to ensure we do those services, and just like we put more mental health and wraparound services in our schools, we have to make sure that does not get lost. I'm competitive. I don't want to go over to Jersey and talk to the lieutenant governor and the governor there. Where they're number one and we're this low, we're going to continue to move that needle, and I'll be proud if you support me to do that as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you. I love speaking of education. There's some real basics here. Basically, we have to get rid of Common Core. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of learning space for children. Second, we need to pay teachers based on them being great teachers and give them more money to stay in the classroom. Rather than them having to move in to administration, you're taking your best teachers out. Number three, we just need to stop social promotion. If a child's not ready to move to the next grade, we need to stop doing the disservice of pushing them along for social promotion. I've never seen a class come into a room where I was in a classroom of 50 children and everybody knew everyone else's age for social promotion. We're doing a disservice to our community. We absolutely, from day one, and one of the major reasons I ran for politics and ran for the governor's position, we need to make sure that more of your tax dollars, being one of the highest funded per student states in the nation, is being rewarded with great results from children. We're one of the worst in performance, one of the highest in cost. How do we do that? We stop wasting money. We have one of the lowest amounts of every dollar in the nation getting into the classroom. We have the most complicated funding mechanism in the nation. Even the funding people from all the school districts couldn't explain how they fund a school. So please, let's start using common sense. More money in the room, empower the teachers, empower the principals, and if schools have 30% occupancy, do something to manufacture an environment where more efficient buildings are helping us educate our children. Thank you.
I think the first step we should take is we should elect the first public school educator ever to be governor of this state. I've taught in 3 different schools, first through the program called Teach for America. The first school I taught in, the school was closed by a judge because the roof was collapsing. 100% of our students, not 99, not 100% of our students were students of color. The inequities continue to fester in our school system. It takes leadership to change them. There are a lot of entrenched interests that are interested in keeping things the same. We have a funding formula in this state that was written in the 1940s. What do you think the people that wrote that funding formula look like? What do you think their values were? Is that what represents us today? Is that where our resources should go? The Annie E. Casey Foundation recently ranked Delaware Public Schools the 46th in the country, the 5th worst, right? We have 17 schools in our state, public schools in Little Delaware, that have single-digit proficiency in reading or math, single digit. That's less than 1 in 10 students. A lot of the problem is funding. Our 22-page education plan includes dramatic increases in funding, $600 to $900 million over the course of 4 years. It also includes intensive investments in early education. I know when kids are coming in to what we hope will be universal for pre-K at the age of 4 or 5, and they're already behind, catching up is very hard to do. We need to start earlier. It's not going to be easy. There are many people that have come before and said they're going to change this and that. I heard them. They often came to our school. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take passion, and I'm eager to take on that charge.
How we answer this question is the most important question for the next governor. Because the idea of raising an extra $600 to $1 billion of additional revenue to make it into the classroom will be one of the most substantial changes to the state budget in Delaware since Russ Peterson went from a commission form of government to a cabinet form of government in 1969. We can't get there through just efficiency. Mike's exactly right. I mean, the fact we have 19 school districts for 1 million people, I mean, Philly's got twice as many, kids in their system, and they have 1 school district. Montgomery County, Prince George's County, other places that are 1 million person counties have a single school district. Christina can't even govern itself right now, right? I mean, their board's kind of imploding. Possibly a time for a consolidation. This is a hard conversation. So, but there might be a couple $100 million of savings. I mean, because right now, as Mike pointed out, there is less money making it to the classroom. Almost 40 cents on the dollar is not making it to the classroom right now. It's a huge percentage. I mean, in places like Minnesota and Maryland and Massachusetts, that's 10%. So that's a piece of it. But we're going to have to raise revenue. This is not going to be an easy conversation. I mean, the property tax reassessment, having that be more equalized, creates a foundation to have this conversation. There's a way in a very Delaware solution to have folks that have investment properties and out-of-state owners and things like that, paying the lion's share of that, but we are going to have to raise real revenue. My concern is that if you don't do that in the first year, everything else we're talking about, in terms of teacher pay, in terms of early childhood, in pre-K, in terms of compensation for educators, in terms of lower class size, all of that becomes almost impossible unless you get the money right first, and you have to do it the first year, because then you're in an election year, and folks are never going to vote for a tax increase during an election year.
Thank you all. Okay, the next question is related to environmental justice and industrial pollution. Delaware has a history of leniency towards industrial polluters, as reflected in DNREC's insufficient enforcement and its acknowledgement of needing more positions and funding for effective oversight. Meanwhile, health disparities in communities near industrial areas are often blamed on lifestyle factors rather than environmental conditions. As governor, what specific changes would you implement to reduce the impact of pollution on low-income communities and communities of color?
Look, I mean, this is one of the great kind of tragedies of Delaware. We have sacrifice zones in the Route 9 corridor, the 495 corridor, around Millsboro, around different parts around Newport, where basically industrial pollution has allowed generation after generation of communities to suffer from unbelievable disparate health outcomes. When I was Secretary of DNREC, the first thing that I wanted to focus on was the coal plants. Because if you look at where the coal plants were in the states and you look at where the cancer clusters were, all of a sudden there's this complete overlap. And Bethany, the Lieutenant Governor, and I served on this commission together, this cancer consortium, looking specifically at this. Working with Governor Markell, we shut down 9 of the 10 coal units in the state, and we forced the 10th unit to put $300 million of controls on it. It was a transformational change in terms of the amount of air pollution reduced, but more importantly, kids in those communities could actually breathe a little easier. Now there's a harder conversation getting into some of the other industrial facilities. And look, because we have renewable energy at a price point that was never more affordable than it is right now, because we have opportunities for things like green hydrogen to repower fossil fuels and things that have been polluting communities, it's never been easier to. But this has to be a charge, because when you look at the social determinants of health, that environmental one in Delaware in particular, whether it's contamination in our water, whether that's contamination in the air or the soils, we were able to reduce air emissions more than any other state in the country when I was DNREC secretary, and it still wasn't nearly enough. You're going to need a secretary that's absolutely committed to this, making sure this is a top priority. There are hard conversations around cumulative impacts and making sure that we are looking at the full burden, but no community should be a sacrifice zone in this state. Is that read for me? Not yet. Okay, sorry. No community should be a sacrifice zone. Not a single kid in the state should be worried about the air they breathe or the water they drink. There's absolutely solutions that can do it. Other states across the country are doing it. We just need new leadership that understands these issues at a personal level to be able to make the change. Thank you.
Delaware economy traditionally runs on the 4 C's: chickens, chemicals, cars, corporations. Chickens, chemicals, cars, corporations. The first 3 of those 4 have often horrendous environmental impacts on the neighbors to those industrial places. We're now seeing the legacy of that. Without appropriate investment in DNREC, my experience at the county is if you don't do something, if you don't stand up and do something, the deepest pocket individuals will take control. So what we did at the county when one of the largest waste management, one of the largest landfill companies in the world, wanted to nearly double the size of its landfill in Minquadale, when they paid off neighborhood associations around them to say yes, we stood up and we said no. They came to me, they offered me deals. We still said no. We're going to invest heavily to protect communities. The environmental injustices of the past, generations earlier, decisions made, we're seeing the negative impacts of that in terms of our environment, but also in terms of our health, inequitable health outcomes. It's going to take dramatic and direct action, transforming the way DNREC works, transforming the way DNREC works with local government to truly protect communities that have suffered from environmental injustices for far too long.
I would suggest this isn't something we're going to be able to work our way out of with DNREC. I would suggest this is something that we need to focus more attention and creative thinking and problem resolution towards really getting to where we need to be. First of all, we have terrible toxicity in Delaware, and we did, during a certain person's previous engagement with Governor Markell, Colin was a secretary, and we started something called the California Clean Car Act 1. Many of us were supportive of it, and we saw numbers drop. Now, out of no disrespect, I'm not sure those numbers dropped because of the Clean Car Act or the fact that we lost General Motors and we lost Chrysler and we lost DuPont. We lost the credit cards, but they weren't really polluting much, and we do still have the chickens. There's 5 C's. But at any rate, the point is we need to come up with creative fixes. Are those fixes putting EV stations all over Delaware? Are those fixes telling everyone they have to have an EV car by a certain date? How are the minorities, communities going to be able to keep up with that? How are we going to have parts of our city where we're going to have proper EV recharging, but yet they can't have a gas-powered car? Why haven't we even considered the beauty and the significant savings in some sort of a tweener step where you go to hybrids? I've got 3 hybrids. Half EV, half gas. I have to go on, but I think you get the point. Technology, innovation, and digestion of smart paths forward are the way to fix this problem.
Wow, thank you. Having led the Medical Reserve Corps response to disaster preparedness for the state, ready on day 1 when there is a disaster, I've seen this happen in our pollutants with corporations and companies. What I have to say to you folks is this: environmental justice. Go look at body burden. Body burden is real. It is the impact on the physical disparities that occur particularly in our black and brown communities more often. I was honored and humbled to sponsor legislation, the Community Involvement Advisory Fund. I served on that a decade. And as our Secretary O'Mara indicated, we have worked on cancer clusters. I live cancer clusters. I live by the last coal burning factory in Sussex County. My father died of cancer. My brother had advanced stage 4 cancer. My mother, brain cancer. That affected my entire life. I take this personally. So So I've sponsored a lot of unsexy pieces of legislation, and as your next governor, I'm going to work with the groups in this room, Justice 40 Partners, broadening our view, League of Women Voters, many of you. What we're going to do, we're not only going to do the lead, the asbestos, the radon, and the air and the pollutants and the asthma that we see from the heat that's arising, but we're going to have that model plan that other states have put in place, and we can do that. There are ways that we can leverage those funds. I know I created an unsexy office called the OSHA office. We didn't have one, folks, as a state rep. I had to give a little bit to the companies. We ended up created a healthy homes program where we go out and we visit the homes and we address the issues statewide. As your next governor, this is a top issue, a top priority, and we can and we will be able to make some progress. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is related to criminal legal system reform. Delaware's criminal legal system heavily relies on fines and fees imposed on defendants regardless of their financial capacity, which has been shown to increase recidivism and deepen poverty. Despite recent reforms, more work is needed. If elected, how would you continue efforts to reform this system? Me again. Back up. Really important, folks. As the lone person in this race who's chaired the Pardons Board, and when I stood before many of you as Lieutenant Governor, I made a promise that I would address commutations and pardons. There was a 3-year wait for commutation, 2-year wait for pardon. We have reduced that now to 2 to 3 months. I will tell you this, I am absolutely committed to making sure that we do the reform necessary to eliminate and support our members in the community who made mistakes, who need second chances, and eliminating these fees. We should not be incarcerating persons because they don't have the fees or the legal representation. That is an injustice. If you ask folks who've come before me, we've linked them with different groups in this room. I appreciate you. I thank you so much because everyone deserves that second chance to be able to be in the workforce, to have the house, to be able to have their children educated. And so in my plans as the next governor, we will absolutely positively look at reform around restitution, reentry. We had a Reform Alliance here 2 months ago. It's a national initiative. They picked Delaware because we're making changes, not only in our behavioral health system, but across the country as a model of where we need to go. Our veterans and others, have a veteran's wife here. We know, Mr. Walls, you're out in the audience somewhere. We have to make sure that we are addressing those issues as well. They should not be locked up because they cannot pay the restitution. We need to make justice reform and assist those individuals. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I mentioned a moment ago when I was at University of Delaware, I was in criminal justice. In my first year in criminal justice, they do all the basics classes. But in your second year, it started getting very interesting, especially the first semester. Second semester, I did a ride-along, and I immediately moved into a business administration. I watched some stuff I just was not comfortable with in my life. I always thought I was going to be that policeman or something. I saw the issues that needed solutions. I'm 63. I was 21. That's 42 years to make adjustments. You want to lower the cost of prison and reform and jails and everything. We have to reduce the recidivism. And when you throw somebody and you lock them up and you throw them in a cage or you do whatever you're doing, then by the time you let them out, anyone they knew who was a good person who could have been their mentor or helped them are gone. When I opened my first flower shop, I had a gentleman walk in my door. I'm a 22-year-old kid. And he said, I need to tell you one thing. I said, you're hired after we got done the interview. I just got out of jail. I said, oh, I'm thinking, when? Yesterday. I was like, oh, I saw your ad. I need a job. I live on Route 40. I'll find a way to get to work every day. This young man was one of the best employees I've ever hired. Why? Because he saw I believed in him and I gave him a path forward. We need to have more compassion, more direction, and more clarity that the number one affecting thing for affordable prison is get rid of the recidivism. If they keep recidivating, it's not helping anyone.
We need to end the criminalization of poverty. No one in our community should have handcuffs on their wrist because they are poor. In my first 6 months, I will review the case of everyone incarcerated in our state on a nonviolent drug crime and work to release every single one of those individuals. I had an opportunity as county executive or as a citizen to go into Gander Hill Prison, to Howard R. Young Correction Institution in Wilmington, and teach. Every few weeks, I went with Jack Saunders and J.J. Francis, and we taught students. It was shocking to me that many of the inmates were not able to attend for one reason or another. They were getting punished for one infraction or another, or didn't earn enough points to come to the class. We're going to change the Department of Corrections, which is currently, for many, a department of punishment. We have to make sure there are amazing programs like Project New Start and the Hope Commission that provide opportunity from day one when you leave prison, like Mr. Ramon gave that worker. We need to start day one from when you're incarcerated, making sure every incarcerated individual has an opportunity to learn, to earn a GED, to learn a college education, maybe even a PhD, learn a vocational training skill so they're 100% prepared to re-enter society on day one. I will be the first governor in a long time who's managed a police force. For 8 years managing a police force, we are going to incorporate behavioral health, mental health, and substance use assistance in policing across this state like never before.
If you look at the stats right now of recidivism across the country over the last 3 years, there's only one state that has a higher rate of recidivism than the state of Delaware, and that's Alaska. I'm not exactly sure why. It's one of the greatest stains. I mean, of all the places where we're still in the 1950s and not the 2020s, our criminal justice system is absolutely at the top of the list. And I agree with Matt. I mean, like, this idea of continuing to criminalize poverty is actually just beyond the pale. I was talking to a woman that had just returned from Baylor just a few weeks ago. And she was just pointing out the disparity between the amount they can earn for different projects they work on versus the costs of different services that they're provided, and the debt that some folks actually come out with coming out of jail. I mean, there's the number of places that we are still backwards. I mean, the legislature did an incredible thing under Mimi Brown and Brian Townsend's leadership a couple of years ago with so many advocates in this room's leadership on the Clean Slate Act. Actually fulfilling that promise, we're actually taking hundreds of thousands of expungements and doing it in a timely fashion to give folks a second lease on life is a huge opportunity. Getting rid of a lot of the way we focus on probation, where most folks are going back because of technical violations, not because of actual committing additional crimes. I mean, and Marie Pinckney's been doing amazing work on this that frankly should have gotten done this legislative session. It absolutely has to get done next year. Like, the number of places where we are like, the work on bail. I mean, the number of folks, in fact, we've criminalized, being poor with bail, where folks that are women disproportionately are serving time in pre-detention in situations because they can't afford the few $100 for bail. I mean, like, every part of this system is criminalizing poverty. And so I love that there's agreement in a bipartisan way. This is one of those areas, like, they made progress in the Trump administration, right, with bipartisan support in Congress. This has to be a priority for the next governor, though, because we can take our state from the 1950s to the 2020s and go from a laggard to becoming a leader on this.
Thank you. The next question is around police accountability and transparency. In 2023, legislation was weakened for proposed police reform by removing key transparency and accountability provisions, leaving police misconduct investigations largely confidential and under police control, with minimal reporting to the Criminal Justice Council. What steps would your administration take to enhance police accountability and transparency?
The Senate Bill 149 that was just referred to is this is one of those classic Delaware Way stories that just drives me absolutely insane, right? We got a huge majority in the House, right? We have a supermajority in the Senate. You had a piece of legislation that had a majority of the body on the bill when it went through the Judiciary Committee. It comes to the Judiciary Committee in the Senate with I hope I'm not triggering folks that are actually involved in this fight, but it comes through the Judiciary Committee with massive support, and then it stalls, and all of a sudden, some folks in the legislature that served in their careers in the police department, different forces came together to try to water it down, kill it, break it apart, and leave the most important parts out. It's a classic Delaware story. You contrast that in Maryland, where they had a similar conversation, where you had smaller majorities, but you had the will of leadership to actually get the bill on the floor and actually force people to vote on it. The things that die in Delaware die because we don't allow the vote. They die before they actually get onto the floor of the chamber. Most Democrats could not vote against labor reform if it was on the floor, but they can stick it in a committee drawer, either in appropriations or in leadership's drawer. this is one of those fights that, frankly, we have to figure out ways to elevate the profile to make sure that these bills get to the floor. And look, the two pieces that got left out, and look, there are some important parts in SB 205 and SB 206, the pieces that passed, but making sure that the community review boards have actual teeth, and then making sure that there is transparency that we're seeing in almost every other state around us. We can be entirely supportive of having, well-respected police agencies, and at the same time have the communities have trust that some of the bad apples are being weeded out. There's absolutely a way to do both, but it's going to take leadership, and the fact that SB 149 failed is one of the worst examples of the Delaware way at its worst.
We entrust citizens who go through training, an application process to put on a uniform, and we equip them with weapons. And they, by law, are allowed to give commands to citizens. And they're allowed to, in the most drastic instances, use those weapons. There needs to be 100% accountability of every individual who we give those rights to. I am the first, not only the first county executive, but the first local elected official in any local government in Delaware to create a police accountability board. I'm also the only elected official in the state of Delaware who signed an order requiring a police force to release body-worn camera footage to residents. I believe that a police force that is paid by you and equipped by you must be accountable to you. We're going to do everything we can to further those goals, not just in the state police, not just in our larger police agencies, but in police agencies across the state. It's going to take citizen involvement. I see in the back the chairwoman of our Police Accountability Board. One of the great things about our Newcastle County Police Accountability Board are the number of people who've stepped up, who've raised their hand to serve, to say, hey, it's not easy, right? Police officers often have their point of view. There are entrenched interests that do not want things to change. But together, we can do this. We can move forward and create much greater accountability in this state than we've seen before.
Thank you. I think you heard me a moment ago before this question, not knowing it was coming, state my start out as a young man to be in criminal justice at the University of Delaware and why. And I think you also heard that I ended up moving into a business administration. There are some very innate reasons for that, and I do believe our police are wonderful people, and I believe there's some bad eggs in every basket. What we need is for the community of people to have a comforting way that they know when the bad apples come out, they get pulled from the batch. I don't know that we have that yet. I know that we have an awareness that we need it. I told you, when I was 20, I started a business. We're 42 years later. Then I went into legislature. Why? Because I thought I could help solve some problems. I thought maybe that business sense would be good in the legislature. Well, there was 41 of us. So every idea, you have to convince 41 other people. Representative Adina Wilson, Anton's back there. You know how hard it is, right? And I just think at this point, my life needs to be in a place where I can help solve problems, take advantage of a ton of real life experiences, and create a Delaware that's better for my grandchildren and my children, and that needs to center on problem resolution, and this is one that I know we can help solve.
Thank you. The Law Enforcement Police Accountability Act is rather personal at times for me. My career is about public service and helping. I started at 13 years of age in the community, volunteering, working. Actually, they let me do things in healthcare at that age you couldn't today. I say that because no one should be hurt at the hands of someone is meant to care for you. Whether it's a law enforcement agent, a nurse, doctor, whoever it is, should not be tolerated. I am proud that our state police and with Representative Cook and others got together with law enforcement and many of you advocates in this room, thank you, to come forward with change. But as been stated by everyone here, more change has to occur, and how we have to do that is having the right leadership who understands where we need to go and the direction we need to make sure that the George Floyds, the horrific situations that we've watched, isn't tolerated. And so I have to tell you, I have the opportunity to often be working in police with law enforcement because of social justice issues, social substance abuse issues. We've done drug diversion. Right now, all the troops in the state, we now have social workers, licensed counselors, because there's a lot of this is mental health trauma and prevention, as you all know. So in addition, working with the Criminal Justice Council, working with you all, yes, we need to continue further with the law, but in the meantime, we need to also continue with those wraparound services that we have put to and want to absolutely invest that are going to make the difference in trauma prevention as well. So it's a lot of hands on deck that are going to be needed. Thanks.
The next question is related to protecting voting rights. How do you plan to protect and expand early voting and absentee voting options in Delaware? And what measures will you implement to safeguard against voter suppression tactics?
Wow, really important. To my friends of the League of Women Voters, where I was a member in this state for over 3 decades, this is fundamental. And as the lone woman who has been out on television down in D.C. dressed as a suffragist, voting rights are real. Yeah, I was 9 months pregnant on the cover down in Washington, D.C., championing this at the 75th anniversary. We have to make sure, as your next governor, you know, we went through the court system this past year. I know Senator Gay and others, the legislation. I'm so proud of the fact that we do now have early voting, which, by the way, we all hope you are participating in, and absentee voting. But we also have to be protective of our rights, of our community. There is no room for what we're seeing in some of the red states right now where we're trying to have voter suppression. It is unconscionable, it's intolerable, and as the next governor, this is something I'm going to absolutely continue to fight for. I have been pleased to sit in the General Assembly and vote for increased opportunities in voting that were not present in the past. And I just am so appreciative of those who are here this evening who have come out, because I look around this room and I think in every row and almost every seat, I see individuals who had that fundamental respect. My husband, my father, Army infantry medic, husband, Navy military, first black general in America, Hazel Johnson Brown, educated me. Democracy, freedom, it is imperative, and that's what we are all about. And that's why bipartisan, we must protect all voting rights. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Many of you probably have figured this out. I am the lone Republican up here, so extinct species. There's only 2 of us left in Newcastle County. But the reality is I am also the minority leader in the House. And that's kind of interesting when there's only 2 from Newcastle County and the Rhino ends up being the leader. But I lead from passion and I try to be wise and insightful. And we, as a House, I'm very proud to say, sponsored the bill with my minority whip, Lyndon Yerrick, to bring early voting back. If many of you remember, vote by mail was struck down by the courts, and early voting and absentee voting were struck down. We wrote a bill to readdress that and change the Constitution. It seemed that the judge then reversed the opinion, the next court, so it was instilled. But here's what we need in our country. We need to have every state do what Delaware's done. As a governor, sometimes you got to lead from the front and support from the back, rather than looking around and see what everybody else is doing, whether you're in the middle of a pandemic or you're in the middle of voting chaos. Everyone has the right to vote in the most effective, efficient way that works for them. Every vote also has to be accurate. I get that, because we don't want people running around afterwards saying, oh, they stole this election, they stole that election. That's not healthy for our country. As your governor, I will work hard to make sure we continue to protect our voting rights in Delaware as we have over the last 2 years. Thank you.
You know, Representative Ramon, it's interesting you said you're one of 2 Republicans, because if we stop sending those 2 Republicans down to Dover, we would have a supermajority and we'd be able to enshrine vote by mail in our state constitution. So I appreciate you all being here tonight. I need your help this next week, but let's get out and help individuals like Monica Beard as well to be a state representative. That, more than anything, will help to enshrine these fundamental rights in our state constitution. I think we need to go further. If you didn't change your registration to Democrat by the middle of May, you can't vote in the primary next week. I don't think that makes sense, right? There should be same-day voter registration, right? I think we need to look at other innovations, other things happening around the country. Ranked choice voting, right? Top two runoff. This game of like, oh, I'm going to vote for this person because I don't know if this person can. We got to end that, right? But it takes leadership to do it, and maybe it takes sending a few more Democrats who are like-minded down to Dover.
That's why he's running for governor. Look, I mean, this is one of those classic examples, though, of Delaware Democrats not fully appreciating the power that they have, right? Because the answer is, I think you've heard from pretty much everybody, is we have to enshrine these rights in our state constitution. And as soon as Judge Connor's decision came down from the Superior Court, there was a quick conversation about could we get a constitutional amendment, the first leg done this session. And there were other bills, there's different versions that were kind of being debated, but we didn't get that done. Even though we have a supermajority in the Senate now, thanks to Russ Huxtable and Kyle winning, in the last couple of years, we're within 2 votes, and I'm guessing we could have persuaded Representative Ramon and Representative Smith and potentially Representative Yerrick, or at least force them to take a vote and see who they're going to side with. Sorry. But we didn't do that. We didn't do it because we're polite, right? So all of a sudden now, we're 2 more years away from having basic voting rights enshrined in our state constitution. So we still look more like Alabama when it comes to voting rights than we do like Maryland or Massachusetts or California or New York. It's just abysmal. And I agree with Matt. I mean, I think there are opportunities for innovation here. There's all kinds of pieces, but the basics, right? And the fact that a judge that was appointed by a Democrat, a Republican judge, but appointed by a Democrat, had a plain text reading that basically said absentee voting, permanent absentee voting is unconstitutional, shows how poor the laws on the books actually are, right? And we can disagree with that decision, and thank God Kathy Jennings kind of very quickly came with the appeal, and we won the appeal, and kind of unanimous stats. But this is one of those areas, right, when we're seeing President Trump do everything he possibly can to avoid voting rights across the board, trying to destroy confidence in institutions, we need to be a beacon of light for what voting rights should look like in the 21st century.
Thank you. The next question is addressing Black maternal mortality. Black maternal mortality rates continue to rise in Delaware, exacerbating healthcare disparities. Will you support the creation of a reproductive healthcare equity fund to help cover the costs of reproductive healthcare for uninsured or underinsured individuals and to expand the number of healthcare providers, including doulas, in the state? If so, how would you implement this?
I really appreciate this question, right? Because when you look at our statistics, right, around infant mortality and maternal health, they are not anywhere near most of our Democratic colleague states. And a lot of it is the lack of investment. So absolutely, I commit to supporting a reproductive healthcare equity fund, and Cover Every Child Act. I mean, there's things that we've been talking about for years in this state. I mean, Krista Griffith dropped that bill 149 a couple of years ago to cover every child. And it's another good example, though. This was the bill that would have made sure that undocumented children would have had access to health care. Passes through committee very quickly, goes to the Appropriations Committee. It's got a $13 million note on it, which is massively overblown because it didn't account for any of the savings of having folks not have to go to the emergency room for basic things that could have been captured in primary care. And so all of a sudden the bill dies, right? So all of a sudden now 5,000 kids still don't have health coverage. I think this has to be one of the absolute top priorities of health care. I mean, I think when you talk about kids and mothers, states that do right by kids and mothers are healthier, stronger states. And so there are a bunch of federal programs we're not opting into right now. There's a whole bunch of resources that we could leverage better, but every dollar we spend here saves us 10. It's one of the smartest, most easy investments that we could possibly make, and yet we treat it as like an investment that's just a cost and not something that has a huge societal return. And these guys have heard me say this at 50 different debates at this point, so I'll do it one more time. Frederick Douglass once said, it's much easier to build strong children than repair broken men. by not investing in children and their mothers at this critical time, we all of a sudden end up paying for the rest of their lives because we're not making those investments. We should be so much smarter than this as the first state.
When Roe fell, a group of courageous women came together and created something called the First State Abortion Fund. They called me for funding, and their pitch was that while Roe is enshrined in law here and it's safe and legal, women will come from other states in need of reproductive care. We provided funding from our county, and a few months later, they were supposed to have, I think, initial funding for a year. A few months later, they called and they said they need more funding. The funding went much quicker than they expected, and I said, well, do you have data on where individuals are coming from? They said almost all of them are coming from Delaware. It was an unmet need for years and years that people in this room probably know about, and requires regular, ongoing funding, not coming and begging to local governments for grants on a regular basis. We need to make sure we're a society where nothing stands between a woman and her doctor when it comes to reproductive health care. Not the law, not financial resources. In the county, we also partnered with Children and Families First to fund a program that I am a huge fan of, a home visiting nursing program called Nurse Family Partnership. A home visiting nurse goes to a first-time expectant mother in poverty, goes to her home, works with her from pregnancy until the child is 2 years old. We've doubled the size of the program in Newcastle County. We have to make sure every first-time expectant mother in poverty in the state of Delaware has access to a nurse like in this program.
Maternal access and maternal mortality should not be disproportionate by race, and it is. That's a problem we need to resolve. I'm very proud, Matt, it's really intriguing listening to you have all this wisdom of how the house runs, but I never see you down there. For 16 years, the last 4 years, we have had the most diverse, highest quantity of House members from the African American female than ever in the history of Delaware. Medina, congratulations, and you have a wonderful group. And let me tell you what happens in the House. We're all respectful. I've been a leader for 2 years, and we've had 2 of the most respectful engagement years ever. Before you listen to somebody who's in the county with 12 other people from his own party and not used to working bipartisan, consider this. Everything's on the record. Go look in the state of Delaware's site and see who voted for all of these bills. And Medina will tell you when you walk in the back of the room that helped equalize mortality for maternal African American women, that helped with doulas, that helped provide funding to Delawareans for Delaware. We're very compassionate. We work together, and we don't need the rhetoric. Guys, I'm the Republican. My people didn't even come. It's the 3 Democrats, and I'm getting jabbed at. So Delaware's bigger than this. We got to get over it, but thank you.
Thank you. As a former member of the House and to Representative Anton Wilson, great to have you. Listen, folks, my life started, my first job, with women who had to make very difficult decisions. I have been a perinatal nurse, a childbirth educator, a perinatal grief counselor, and comprehensive women's choice is important. You know, I've been a contributor to that Women's Abortion Fund. I am a proud faculty who has taken folks out to the Nurse Family Partnership and been in the homes and been in the community. I have to tell you, House Bill 343, House Bill 345, House Bill 346, House Bill 362. I know all those bill numbers because I've been there with the Senate, Senator Pinckney, Representative Minor Brown, and thanks to you all, Medicaid coverage, doula coverage, we were able to get that. It's not enough. Infant mortality rate is the indicator of a population's health. I will tell you that inequities are real. Racial discrimination is real. We have to hire and recruit Under my plan, we'll be having, and please visit bethanyforde.com, medical education program. We're going to be linking in and bringing diverse providers. Having served on the Mother-Infant Consortium for over a decade, we now have Dr. Mampasi. We are intentionally leaning in, but we have so much more to do. And I have leaned in to change the overdose system of care in this state, the first in the country to lower our overdose death rates. And how that happened was through community and through stakeholders. We have to demand better. And working collectively, we will be able to do that. It is so incredibly important that we address these factors. Folks, the number one reason black women are dying of black mortality who are pregnant is overdoses still. That inequity is still real, and I am committed to helping to address that in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. We're almost there. Supporting the nonprofit sector, which, all of our event partners, we all lead nonprofits. Delaware's nonprofit sector provides essential services, but often struggles with underfunding due to inefficient state policies and decisions. How will your administration address the funding challenges facing nonprofits to ensure they can continue to serve Delawareans effectively?
Great. Wow. First off, to all the nonprofits in here, please know you do not go unrecognized. I know when looking across this country and working with Governor Green in Hawaii, we just brought the first AI innovation program where persons who are struggling with food security, food waste, we brought that to our state here in Delaware, working with the White House. I use that as an example because it's through the nonprofit community that we can make a difference, that we are actually making sure that's one example of many innovations that we're going to be doing with retailers and others. Hungry people are going to get coupons who are part of the program. Food waste goes down. Innovation happens with nonprofits. You're going to get in me what you've seen over the years. One, I'm going to support you to get the health care access that you need, that you've been trying to figure out a pool. When I was told that senior retiree health care with Medicare Advantage would not happen in the state, I championed that committee and made sure that Medicare Advantage did not happen to our state employees. Folks, you have my commitment. We're going to figure out a way for nonprofits to figure out a purchasing pool to assist you with health care for your employees and others. That's just one example. We're going to leverage more federal funds, and we're going to look at those public-private partnerships. As someone who's led the National Million Women Mentors, leaning into FinTech and STEM, and the first creative economy study in this country with the arts, we know the value, and I thank you. So whether you're in the arts, whether you're in community service, whether you're frontline delivery, in Bethany, I have your back. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is a nonprofit? First of all of you here who participate in nonprofits, we're very grateful because Delaware wouldn't have the tax base it has if you didn't. You save our state money every single day. But what's a nonprofit? A nonprofit is a business with a mission statement and a purpose that isn't allowed to make money. Right? What did we just do in the state of Delaware? I was on a committee with, back when Ken Simpler was the treasurer, with Quinn Johnson and Senator Del Collo and Senator Harris McDowell, and it was called a Budget Smoothing Committee. And what was it set up to do? It was set up to take advantage of when Delaware was doing well, to place money in a position for when Delaware doesn't do well. We don't let the nonprofit entities do that. So when Delaware does well, we equally raise everybody their 5% token or whatever it is, and we help our nonprofits. And when Delaware does poorly, we detract from them in the same percentage. Foolishness. We need to create a measuring mechanism where we can take the value of what those nonprofits are bringing to the state and support them properly with your tax dollars. We can do better. 32 years, it's been the same eyeballs, looking at the same requests in the same way, doing the same easy answers. Maybe it's time, if one of your wonderful colleagues here, if you're here to vote for one party, doesn't make it out, to bring balance to Dover, because balance does engage discussion. Thank you.
As a teacher, I was shocked, particularly as a new teacher, how many resources our school spent, our public school, trying to get more resources for the kids. We had two people, one full-time and one part-time, working pretty much around the clock, trying to get additional resources. If you look at the grant and aid process in Dover, it's almost impossible for small, non-connected nonprofits to get resources. For larger nonprofits, they need to spend a tremendous amount of resources, invest in people to go to Dover to lobby each year just to get the resources to provide services that you and I all desperately need. We're going to look at revamping that process. We're going to sit down with nonprofit leaders and talk about how do we make things easier for nonprofits. Too many individuals working at nonprofits are working on minimum wage, are working without full benefits. They're providing critical, absolutely critical services, raising our kids, providing critical housing to our neighbors, providing health care in communities that do not have access. We need to make sure we're getting those resources out to those organizations, but also working with them so they don't need to spend a tremendous amount of political capital or actual money going down to Dover simply to argue for the most vulnerable across our community.
If DelDOT hired a construction firm to deliver, repairing 301, for example, I just got stuck in that traffic yesterday, we would never propose paying them 70 cents on the dollar. But we do it over and over and over again to nonprofits. And like as someone that runs a huge national nonprofit that, it's constantly getting shortchanged with bad reimbursement rates and overly complicated applications and insufficient access to different healthcare markets, I get it. And so having a governor that actually understands what an indirect rate is and actually understands that you need base funding for your operations, not just for the shiny objects, I think would be transformative. Look, I think the future of delivering services is going to be through these civic partnerships. We're kind of beginning to catch up to some of our European counterparts that have been delivering services more efficiently through nonprofit providers for years. But the only way to build the capacity is to make sure folks are paid like professionals, right? To make sure that folks have access to healthcare, making sure that folks have access to retirement, making sure that folks see it as a career and not just do it as something for a few years before they go into something else to kind of provide for their family. There's an opportunity to do that. And whether it's folks that are getting paid out of DHSS or folks that are getting paid out of kids or folks that are getting paid out of arts or folks that are getting paid out of grant and aid, there's just a across-the-board lack of recognition that nonprofits don't mean no profit and no ability to actually provide funding for their staff. They still have to be able to put food on the table. They still have to be able to support their folks. I think there's a huge opportunity to get this right. And we're looking, especially when we're looking in the healthcare space. When you look at the social determinants of health, the only way to engage communities authentically is going to be through partnerships. Because government's not going to be trusted in a lot of places. That starts with paying folks for having common applications, making sure that folks can buy into the state benefits programs. There's huge opportunities. It just has to be a priority for the next governor.
Thank you. So thank you, all of you. Thank all the candidates for participating today. I almost forgot to give you your closing minutes. Thanks, Becca. Okay, we're only going to do 1 minute because we are running late. So I'm going to start. You want to start? I'm going to start with go ahead with Dr. Hall Long. 1 minute
forgot
closing.
My name. We've been here so long.
I know I'm getting tired.
You're forgiven. Well, thank you all for the attention tonight. I think we've had a great conversation. I am so excited to be considered as your next governor, second woman, first nurse governor in America. As you've heard us talk, we haven't had a chance to go into all the bold plans that I have for our state, but in me, you know somebody who's ready on day one, who has a plan rolling in our first 100 days. And that's going to be around economics, small and big business, opportunity for minority-owned and women-owned business, educational reform, making sure that we have universal ed, that we have high-paid teachers, that we're reforming funding, and that we're making sure we have the healthcare system that is foundational and important, and all the other quality of life measures. I think you know in me, you've got someone who's trusted, who's led nationally, who can lead our continuance in state, and I'm so appreciative, again, of so many who've gotten behind me, our governor, 40 of our state elected officials, and our incredible Delaware Democrat Party, those who were in Emily's list, who know my work with women, and also the incredible work of our hardworking union members. Yesterday was Labor Day. Really appreciate the fact of their hard work, and also, making sure all people stonewall Democrats as well. So thank you for this opportunity. Visit Bethany for DE. Thank you.
So I actually wrote this down so I could go quickly. It's very clear. We all basically agree. We do support nonprofits. They're important. The housing crisis is bad, and it's getting worse. Abuse, sexual abuse and domestic, we need to do much better. Prison reform, reboot. Education, reboot again. Environmental justice, we can do better. Police accountability, it can be improved. Voting access can be modified. Balanced maternal mortality amongst certain races that are unfair, we can do better. What are we doing? 32 years, we were doing better with one party. They've risen to a point of a supermajority in the House, and as our colleague has informed you, because of his wisdom of the House, are 2 people short of having a supermajority in the House and the Senate. We need to listen to Delawareans and not listen to those who fund our campaigns. We need to bring in a problem solver who knows how to resolve problems. And we need someone with experience that a 42-year-long entrepreneur, 16 years state representative, coach, and mentor can bring to Dover to help us bring the team together. Team Delaware is the team we need to work on, not Team Blue, not Team Red. Thank you so much for all being here today. I appreciate you allowing us to participate.
I'm Matt Meyer. It's election time. I'm not making any promises. We're making plans. We're turning those plans into real progress. 10 years ago, I was a 6th and 7th grade math teacher who had a passion for teaching. I got pissed off and ran for office. Since then, we've provided nearly 500,000 COVID tests to Delawareans free of charge, among the largest fast-free testing sites in the country. We've opened our state's largest homeless shelter. We provided police accountability like never before. We even monitored our sewers for COVID, opioids, providing our sewers as a view into collective public health. There are serious problems in our community. 2 years ago, I started running for governor. Since then, we've had more volunteers sign up than anyone running for governor in decades. We've had more individuals contribute to our campaign, more Delawareans contribute to our campaign than anyone running for governor in 16 years. We're presenting a plan for progress in our communities. Please join us at mattmeyer.org, and don't forget to vote. Thank you.
So I'm struggling with the cognitive dissonance. So thank you all for being here, right? And I wish everyone in every vote in the state had a chance to see one of our debates, because they've all been civil like this. Big ideas, there's disagreements. I mean, I tend to be more progressive, folks have different lived experiences, but the disconnect between what happened in this room tonight versus what you're seeing in your mailbox and on TV is a disgrace. And so, here's my commitment to all of you. I'm not gonna say anything without saying it myself. So we're running an entirely positive campaign. That's why you haven't seen as much of us. And I feel like that Sesame Street song, like one of those things is not like the other, right? This is serious stuff, right? Our schools are crumbling. I mean, every single question we asked tonight, these are huge questions. But this isn't what most people are gonna decide on. They're gonna decide on which mailer was more scary, right? And which ad was more offensive. These are huge questions for our state. And look, and I think at the end of the day, anything all of you can do, I'm sure folks in this room support different people, let your friends know that they have to vote and share some of the substance of what was shared today. The consequences of our continued inaction in our state are devastating parts of the population. There's a huge opportunity for transformational change, but it's going to require a new generation of leadership. My name is Colin O'Mara. I'm trying to do something a little different. I appreciate all you being here today, but let's make the kind of change we need in our state once and for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for all of the candidates for your participation. And I agree, you guys made it so easy for me. I did not expect it to go that smoothly, so I really appreciate it. Yes. Thank you, JL. I do want to thank JL for keeping time, and I wanted to thank Becca Cotto for putting this whole thing together, too. So if you'd like to stay for light snacks and meet the candidates who are available to stay, please join us in the back until 9 p.m. Don't forget to vote in the Delaware primary on September 10th and the general election on November 5th. Early in-person primary voting is currently underway, and you can visit the League of Women Voters or Vote 411 website and grab an information packet at the YW table in the back. So thank you again, everyone, for making this so informational.